The waitress sat beside a stranger to hide from her stalker, not knowing he was the mafia boss. The night was bleeding neon. Out here in the Belle-Tide Harbor District, the rain didn't just fall. It came in sideways, assaulting the pavement, turning the streets into a smear of reflected reds and electric blues. I was watching those colors run down the big plate glass window of the Rainfire Supper Club when I saw him. My shift wasn't over for another 2 hours, but the night was already ruined. Dane Riker. He was standing just outside the brass-handled doors, soaked through, but he didn't look cold. He looked wired, electric. His eyes were doing that frantic, hopping dance I remembered, scanning the street, then locking onto the club's entrance. He was kitted out in that same thin jacket he always wore, and he was clutching a thick manila envelope in one hand, tapping it against his thigh. He wasn't just passing by, he was waiting. My stomach went cold. Colder than the ice I'd been scooping all night for gin and tonics. I'd moved 3 times in 18 months, changed my number twice, blocked him on every platform that existed. It never mattered. He saw me. Through the glass, through the blur of the rain and the cursive gold leaf lettering on the window. His lips pulled back in that grin that wasn't a grin, just a showing of teeth. He held up the envelope, a mock salute, a threat. My breath hitched. I backed away from the window, my empty cocktail tray feeling slippery in my hand. I needed cover. Not the kitchen, he knew the layout, knew the back exit. Not the staff room. I needed to disappear into the crowd, but the dinner rush was over. The club was breathing low, settling into the late-night rhythm of quiet jazz and the clinking of heavy glasses. The bar, it was dark, paneled in old mahogany that drank the light. There was one man sitting at the far end, near the service return, where the shadows were deepest. He was nursing a dark liquor in a heavy-cut crystal glass. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my apartment, charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly he looked poured into it. He wasn't watching the trio on the small stage or the sports highlights on the muted screen above the whiskey bottles. He was just still. An island of absolute calm in the middle of the room. Dane pushed through the front doors, shaking water onto the expensive welcome mat. The hostess, new and not recognizing the danger, looked up, annoyed. He ignored her, his eyes scanning, hunting. I didn't think. I just moved. I walked toward the bar, my steps quick but not running, holding my empty tray like I had a purpose. I slid onto the worn leather stool right next to the stranger. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me. As I settled, my knees knocking together, he simply, almost lazily, tilted his glass. He raised it to his lips, but his elbow came up just enough, his profile just wide enough to block my face from the security camera feed above the bar, and, more importantly, from the floor. It was too late. Dane spotted me. He slithered over, that wet wool and stale cigarette smell of his coat hitting me first. Ren, baby, long time. I stared straight ahead at the glowing rows of bottles. Not long enough, Dane. Got something for you, he whispered, his voice slick and low. He dropped the damp envelope on the bar, right next to my elbow. Just a little reminder about what you owe. The fabricated debt, the lie he'd built to keep his claws in me, crafted from a shared lease I'd paid off years ago. I don't owe you anything, My voice was shaking. I hated that. I gripped the aluminum tray on my lap, my knuckles white. Oh, you do, he hissed, leaning closer. I could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath, sharp and sour. You owe for the trouble. You owe for making me look. And I always find you, Ren, you know that. The man beside me hadn't moved a muscle, but I saw his eyes. In the antique copper mirror behind the bar, the one etched with the Rainfire logo, I saw his gaze lift. It wasn't looking at me, or at Dane. It was looking past us. He watched the reflection of the 2 men in dark suits standing near the piano, the ones who always looked like bored patrons but never ordered a second drink. The ones I knew were house security. The stranger tapped one long finger, just once, on the mahogany. a sharp, quiet sound that cut through the bass line from the stage. In the mirror, the two men stopped looking bored. They shifted, their bodies angling toward the bar, their movements fluid, like shadows detaching from the wall. My hands were trembling so badly that the folded bar towel I'd tucked into my apron string slipped and fell to the floor. Before I could even bend to get it, the stranger's hand was there. He retrieved it, placing it neatly on the bar beside me. He turned his head slightly, just enough to speak to me, but his voice was pitched so low it barely crossed the few inches between us. It was heavy, like gravel wrapped in velvet. "Sit still," he said. "I am responsible from this minute." Dane didn't hear him. He was too focused on his prey, high on his own power trip. "Come on, Ren, we're going outside. We need to have a little private talk." He reached for my arm, his fingers cold and wet. The stranger's hand moved again, this time. It went to his breast pocket. He didn't look at Dane. He looked at the bartender, Miguel, who was frozen, watching the scene unfold, his hand halfway to the panic button. The stranger placed something on the bar. It wasn't cash. It was a single chip, heavy, made of black ceramic, with no denomination. It was the kind of chip you only saw in rooms with no windows, the kind that meant you owned the place, or you owned the people in it. "The private session," the stranger said to Miguel, his voice calm, projecting just enough. "The one in the Cypress room. This waitress is needed to service it. Now." Miguel, bless him, snapped to attention like he'd been shocked. "Yes, sir. Right away. Mr. Voss." Mr. Voss. The name clicked, but meant nothing to me. Miguel looked at Dane, his professional mask back on. "Sir, you need to let her go. She's working." "The hell she is," Dane snarled, his grip tightening on my elbow. "She's coming with me." This was the part where I usually screamed, or threw a drink, or ran. But the stranger's calm was infectious. I just sat still, as he'd told me to. The front doors opened again, letting in another blast of wet, cold air. A uniformed officer from the Bell-Tide Urban Order stepped inside, shaking rain from his heavy cap. He was just doing a routine check, a beat cop looking for a dry spot and maybe a free cup of coffee. Dane saw him and hesitated. Cops meant complications. The officer started walking toward the bar, his eyes narrowing on Dane's aggressive posture, his hand hovering near his belt. "Problem here?" Before Miguel could answer, the stranger, "Mister." Voss caught the officer's eye. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just looked. He held the officer's gaze for one long, silent second. The officer stopped. His face went blank, then flickered with something I couldn't place. Recognition, no. It was deeper than that. Fear. And he looked at Mr. Voss, then at Dane, then back at Mr. Voss, and his posture straightened. "No problem," the officer said, suddenly seeming very interested in the weather patterns on the window. He turned his attention fully to Dane. "But you, sir, you look like you're causing one, disturbing the guests. I need you to leave." "What? I didn't do anything," Dane protested, finally letting go of my arm to gesture wildly. "She owes me money." "Take it up in civil court," the officer said, his voice flat. "All business." He put his hand on Dane's shoulder. "Right now, you're coming with me." The two plainclothes security men materialized, one on either side of Dane. It was seamless. One minute he was threatening me. The next, he was being boxed in, steered out the door, flanked by house security, and assisted by a BUO officer who had suddenly found his sense of duty. The door closed. The jazz music swelled to fill the silence. I stared at the spot where Dane had been. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I looked at the man beside me. He was picking up his drink as if the last 3 minutes hadn't happened. I don't know what to say," I stammered, my voice thin. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, placing his glass down. "How did you do that? With the officer, do you know him?" He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. His eyes were a color I couldn't place, somewhere between gray and green, like the harbor water just before dawn. The rainfire likes a quiet atmosphere. He was being loud. It was an explanation that explained nothing. The entire event was too clean, too precise, too orchestrated. It was like watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me and Dane. I didn't know who this Mr. Voss was, but he wasn't just a patron. He was the one who pulled the strings. Just as I was about to ask another question, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket, a vibration of pure, undiluted dread. I already knew who it was from. I pulled it out. A new message. No number, just a blocked ID. It was a photograph. My apartment door. The peeling green paint on number 307. It was dark, taken from the hallway, probably moments ago. Below the photo, one line of text. Wait for the gift. A choked sound escaped my throat. He wasn't with the cop. The cop had just let him go. He was at my home. The officer. The security that just pushed him away. It made him angrier. The man beside me leaned in slightly. His gaze dropped to the phone screen. I didn't try to hide it. I watched his face. The calm, detached expression vanished. It was replaced by something else, something cold and sharp, like steel being drawn from a sheath. The civilized man who bought out singing rooms was gone, and the person beneath was looking at my phone screen with an expression of absolute, chilling focus. "He's at my apartment," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Mister?" Voss pushed his glass away. He stood up. He was taller than I thought, broad-shouldered, radiating an energy that demanded space. He shrugged out of his heavy, impeccably tailored wool coat. It was still warm from his body. He held it out to me. "Leave this place through the kitchen," he said, his voice low and urgent, leaving no room for argument. He draped the coat over my shoulders. It was heavy, enveloping me. It smelled of expensive tobacco and the faintest hint of ozone from the rain. "Do it now." "My shift. My manager." "Your shift is over." I looked toward Miguel, but the man was already steering me toward the service door, his hand a firm, hot pressure on my lower back. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in the guise of protection. I should have been terrified, running from one dangerous man, only to be taken by another, a stranger whose name I barely knew, who could dismiss police with a look. But as I pushed through the swinging doors into the noise, steam, and clang of the kitchen, all I felt was the thrum of that survival instinct he'd triggered. I just listened, and I just moved. The kitchen was a blast furnace of sound and heat, shouts in Spanish, the violent sizzle of the flat top, the crash of steel pans. It smelled of garlic and bleach. "Mister." Voss didn't shove me through. His hand on my back was a firm, guiding pressure, parting the chaos like a ship's bow through water. Cooks and dishwashers, who would normally curse a waitress cutting through the line, saw him and flattened themselves against the stainless steel counters, their eyes down. He bypassed the exit to the alley, the one Dane would be watching, and led me to a heavy steel door marked Freight. He produced a key, not a card, but an old, heavy brass key, and twisted it in the lock. The elevator wasn't for guests. It was a cage of tarnished brass grating and smelled of machine oil and damp concrete. It groaned as it began to move, not up toward the music, but down, sinking into the belly of the building. I was still clutching his coat, the expensive wool a strange comfort against my thin, polyester uniform, the scent of rain and a faint, clean perfume, maybe from the hostess he'd passed on the way in, or maybe just the smell of money clung to my wrist where he'd brushed against me. We descended into a low-ceilinged, private garage. The air was cold. A single black sedan, long and polished to a mirror finish, was the only vehicle in the space. It looked less like a car and more like a shadow given solid form. He walked me to the passenger side and opened the door. The interior light was a soft, muted gold. I slid onto the leather seat. It was impossibly soft. He closed the door, and the chaotic noise of the city, even the muffled thump of the rain, was instantly silenced. It was like being in a bank vault. He got in the driver's side, and the engine started with a low, cultured thrum. Not a roar. He didn't turn on any music. There was just the quiet click of his seatbelt and the rhythmic swish of the wipers. He put the car in gear and navigated the tight ramp up to the street, emerging into the rainy night. He spoke, his voice filling the small, quiet space. "I am Mr. Voss," he said, his eyes on the road. "A friend of the Rainfire." A friend, not the owner, not the manager, a friend who had house security and city police on an invisible leash. The understatement was louder than any threat. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, my voice sounding small. Dane. He won't stop. I've changed my number. I've moved 3 times. I left my last job in the shipyard district after he waited for me in the parking lot for 6 hours. He just finds me. How? It was a simple question. I don't know. He used to be my shift manager at the old diner before... Before what? Before he got involved with the Orchid Ring. The name felt dirty on my tongue, like a secret I shouldn't know. Belltide was full of crews, but the Orchid Ring was different. They didn't just break legs or skim from the docks. They dealt in fake pharmaceuticals, pills that looked real but were packed with chalk and poison. Mr. Voss's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Just for a second, it was the only sign he'd even heard me. "He's proud of it," I continued, the words tumbling out now, fueled by the adrenaline and the terror of that text message. "He's just a bottom feeder, but he loves the protection it gives him. He thinks it makes him untouchable." "Mister?" Voss turned onto the main boulevard, heading away from my neighborhood. "Is he alone?" "No," I whispered. "That's the problem. He's nothing, but he boasts. He boasts that he's protected by Sable Kern. If the name Orchid Ring made his knuckles tighten, the name Sable Kern made the entire temperature in the car drop. He said nothing. He just drove, his gaze sweeping the road, the mirrors, the rain-slicked intersections. My phone buzzed again, a vicious, angry vibration against my leg. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely get it out of my apron pocket. Another blocked ID message. Another photo. This time, it was my lock, the cheap deadbolt on 307. It was splintered, the metal casing pried open and hanging loose. He was inside. He was inside my apartment, waiting for me. A sound, half sob, half scream, tore out of my chest. "Mister," Voss didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't need to. He'd seen the photo in a half-second glance. His reaction was immediate. He wrenched the steering wheel, pulling the heavy sedan into a U-turn so sharp and sudden the tires screamed on the wet asphalt. A sound of pure violence. He was going back. "No, please," I gasped. "You can't. He'll be there. We get you somewhere safe first." He cut me off, his voice no longer calm. It was hard, a slab of granite. He accelerated, the car leaping forward, merging into traffic with an authority that forced other drivers to brake and swerve. "Then you will tell me everything." He wasn't going to my apartment. He was heading for the Tide Bridge, the massive steel artery that connected the harbor district to the affluent, fog-shrouded islands of the Outer Bay. We flew past the warehouses and dive bars, the city lights blurring into long, wet streaks of color. I watched the familiar skyline recede, the red glow of the Rainfire sign shrinking behind us. I felt like I was watching my old life detach, set adrift in the dark water below the bridge. He didn't take me to a police station or a bright public hotel. He drove deep into the industrial heart of the harbor, to a place I'd only ever seen from the Highway Harbor Block C. It was a vast, sprawling complex of warehouses and container yards, fenced in by chain link and razor wire. He drove past the main security gate, where a guard in a slicker snapped to attention and raised the barrier arm without even looking at the car. We drove deep into the maze of stacked containers, the rain hammering on their metal roofs, until we reached a nondescript steel building. "We're safe here," he said. He led me inside, through a loading dock stacked with unmarked wooden crates, and up a flight of metal stairs to an office. The contrast was jarring. The world outside was cold, wet, and industrial, but this room was bright and warm. It had a thick rug, polished wooden desks, and a wide window that looked out over the entire, sprawling yard. He didn't turn on the harsh overhead fluorescents. He clicked on a single green-shaded desk lamp, which cast a warm pool of light. There was an electric kettle on a small credenza. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a request. I sank into a leather chair that felt as soft as the one in his car. I was still wearing his coat. I realized I was shivering, the adrenaline beginning its long, painful retreat. He didn't say anything else, and he just filled the kettle, plugged it in, and took 2 ceramic mugs from a cabinet. He dropped a bag of peppermint tea into one and handed it to me. His movements were steady, economical. The simple domestic act of making tea was so at odds with the man who dismissed cops and pulled U-turns like a stunt driver that my head spun. He leaned against the desk, holding his own empty mug, and just watched me. The quiet hum of the kettle filled the room. My heartbeat, which had been trying to beat its way out of my chest for the last hour, finally began to slow down. His stillness was a gravitational pull, forcing the panic to settle. I took a sip of the tea. It was hot, scalding my tongue, but it was grounding. "He'll trash my place," I said, my voice hollow. "He'll steal. I don't have much to steal." "He won't go back there." "Mister," Voss said. It was a statement of fact. "And he won't be looking for you. You don't know him." "I know his kind." He finally looked at me, his harbor gray eyes holding mine. "I do not let anyone touch my club's people." He said it so simply. My club's people, not employees and not staff. People. It was a word that implied protection, but also possession. I paused, the mug halfway to my lips, caught by the weight of that word. I was his, now. Not because he'd claimed me, but because he'd shielded me. In his world. That was a transaction, and the bill was still to come. "I need to go to work tomorrow," I said, the words sounding stupid and naive even to my own ears. "I have to. I need the money. I can't just—" "You won't be going back to the Rainfire," he said, not unkindly. "Not for a while." He set his mug down. "I have an apartment, a safe house. It's clean. No one knows it exists. You'll stay there, just for one night, until I handle this." One night, what choice did I have? Go back to a splintered door and a man who was obsessed with destroying me, or trust the stranger who moved with the quiet, deadly confidence of a panther? "Okay," I agreed. "Just one night." He nodded, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. We left the warm office and went to another elevator, this one modern and steel, at the end of the hall. As the doors slid open, a woman was standing inside. She was the opposite of Mr. Voss, where he was all quiet stillness. She was coiled energy. She was wearing practical, dark clothing, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "Mara," he said in greeting. "Aurelio," she replied, her voice crisp. She nodded to me, a quick, assessing glance. "The package from the club." I bristled. A package? She hit a button for the top floor, and the elevator began to move. "It's active," she said to him, ignoring me completely. "Dane Riker. He just badged into a self-storage unit off the Kess terminal. Unit 34C. He's moving something. Tonight." "Mister." Voss looked at me, and I saw that cold steel-like focus return. This wasn't just about a stalker anymore. This was about something much bigger. We hadn't just run from Dane. We'd run right into the middle of his business. The apartment was on the top floor. The elevator opened directly into a space that didn't feel like a safe house. It felt like a secret. The entire far wall was glass, looking out over the dark, churning water of the misty cove. The rain had momentarily eased, and the lights of the distant tugboats were sharp pinpricks, dragging lines of gold across the black surface. The air was silent, smelling of sea salt, new carpet, and expensive, unused furniture. Mara did not enter. She remained in the elevator, her eyes scanning the hallway we had just left, which seemed unnecessary given this was the only way in. Aurelio, as he was now called by her, walked into the center of the room. He shrugged off his suit jacket, the one I had just been wearing in the kitchen. He laid it carefully over the back of a minimalist gray sofa. He rolled his shoulders, a simple human movement that seemed strangely out of place. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, held taut by dark suspenders. As he turned to face the window, the lamplight from the street below caught the back of his neck. It was a tattoo. It wasn't the crude, jailhouse ink I was used to seeing on the docks. This was fine-lined, precise, a work of art. It was a compass rose, its design intricate, but the needle didn't point north. It pointed slightly off, to the northeast. It was the unmistakable mark of the Voss syndicate. I'd heard the whispers. Everyone in Beltide had. You didn't work the harbor. You didn't serve drinks in the high-end clubs without hearing the name. The syndicate wasn't just a crew. They were the harbor. They were the invisible architecture that held the city's underbelly together. And the man in front of me wasn't just in it. That compass, I'd heard, was worn only by the one who set the direction. My blood, which had just started to warm up from the tea, went ice cold again. I had traded a frantic, rabid dog for a sleeping lion. He turned, catching my stare. He knew what I was looking at. He didn't bother to hide it. I understated things, he admitted, his voice quiet, but it filled the cavernous room. At the club, I'm not just a friend of the Rainfire. He walked toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I am the man who decides things in Beltide, what ships dock, what cargo moves, and who is allowed to operate in the shadows. He looked at me, his reflection pale in the glass next to the very real, very solid man, and I have just decided that you are done running. The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't a comfort, it was a judgment. I was a problem he had decided to solve. I was grateful, terrified, and angry, all at once. The gratitude was for my life. The terror was for his power. The anger was for the fact that my life was, once again, out of my own hands. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice coming out stronger than I expected, in return. He almost smiled. It was a tiny movement at the corner of his mouth, gone before it could settle. "You've been running from one man who wants to own you. I am not him." He turned fully toward me. "What I want, Ren, is for you to be safe. That is the first thing." He paused, and his gaze hardened, the gray in his eyes turning to iron. "The second thing I want is to end the Orchid Ring. They're sloppy, they're loud, and they kill people with their poison." His words hit a nerve so raw it took my breath away. "Poison," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You call it what it is." "What do you call it?" "My sister," I said, my throat tightening. "My younger sister. June, last year. She has chronic pain from a fall. She got a prescription filled, painkillers, only they weren't painkillers. They were from a batch that the Ring had pushed into the pharmacies. Fentanyl and drywall. The papers said later. She almost died, 2 days in the ICU, her kidneys shutting down." I hadn't realized I was gripping my own hands, my nails digging into my palms, until he took a step closer. His face, which had been controlled, impassive, changed. The air around him darkened. The impersonal mission he'd mentioned, ending a rival crew, had just become deeply, intensely personal. He wasn't just looking at a waitress he'd rescued. He was looking at a victim of the same enemy he was hunting. "June," he said, testing the name. "Is she well now?" "She's recovering, but she's not the same." I looked down. "She's why I took the job at the Rainfire, to pay her medical bills, the ones that came after the fake medicine." "Then you and I want the same thing," he said, his voice a low growl. "They broke the code. They don't just target their own. They poison the innocent. They poison families. For that, there is no negotiation, only an ending." A sharp, electronic buzz broke the tension. The elevator doors slid open. It was Mara. She was holding my worn, canvas messenger bag, the one I'd stashed in the staff lockers hours, or maybe a lifetime, ago. "You left this," Mara said. She handed it to me. I cleared your locker. My phone, I said, digging into it, is a liability, Mara said, holding up a small, sealed silver bag. It's in here. You'll get a new one. She looked at Aurelio. His storage unit was a bust, empty. He was just moving boxes, but he made a call. We have a tail on him, but he's running quiet. She handed Aurelio a tablet, tapped the screen, and then, with a single nod, she was gone. The elevator doors closed, leaving us in silence once more. I clutched my bag. It was the only piece of my old life I had left. I sank onto the sofa, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. I just wanted something familiar. My keys, my wallet. A small, spiral-bound notebook fell out onto the cushion. My old order book, the kind waitresses used to take orders. The paper cheap. I hadn't used it in months, not since the Rainfire upgraded to tablets. I had kept it because it had my old schedules, pay stubs, addresses, and notes. I flipped through the pages, a calendar of bad tips and long doubles. And then I saw it. A page from my last week at the diner, the one where Dane had been manager. He'd been borrowing my notebook constantly, using it to track something. I'd thought it was inventory. The page was covered in his frantic, sloppy handwriting, a series of letters and numbers, SK449, BSK202A, CT900L. What is that? Aurelio asked, moving to stand over the sofa. I don't know, I said, my mind racing. It's Dane's handwriting. He was always scribbling in my book. He said he was tracking liquor stock. But this doesn't look like inventory. I ran my finger over the letters, SKCT, and these numbers, they're codes. Sable Kern, Aurelio said, his voice sharp. SK and CT, Coastal Terminal, the private cargo port. He took the notebook from me, his fingers brushing mine. He held it up to the light. These are container numbers. He walked to the window, the notebook in one hand, the tablet Mara had given him in the other. He tapped the screen, his face illuminated by its cold, blue light, his reflection staring back at us from the glass. I stood up and walked to stand beside him. We were inches apart, staring out at the dark harbor. But we were both looking at the reflection of the tablet in the glass. He was pulling up shipping manifests, cross-referencing the numbers from my cheap 5-cent notebook. A match, SK449B, status in yard. Another match, CT900L, status unloading. He wasn't tracking inventory, I whispered. My skills as a waitress, my stupid obsessive need to balance my books and track my orders, kicking in. He was tracking their product. Look at the dates. He wrote these down every Tuesday. That's when the big freighters from Asia dock. Aurelio was silent, his focus absolute. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold glass. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his shirt's starch and something else, something metallic and sharp, like the air before a lightning strike. I could hear his breathing, slow and controlled, even as my own heart was starting to race, not with fear, but with something else, anticipation. The light from a passing tugboat swept across the room, illuminating his face. He turned his head, and his eyes met mine. We were reflected in the glass, two figures framed against the dark city, impossibly close. The space between us was electric, charged with the revelation and the shared danger. He held my gaze for a long, heavy moment, then he took one deliberate step back. He broke the connection, putting air between us. When you do not feel safe, he said, his voice low, almost rough, I will not touch. I swallowed, nodding, though I wasn't sure if the danger I felt was from him or from the proximity. He turned from the window, all business once more. Sit on the sofa. He tossed the tablet onto the coffee table. You understand his system. You see the patterns. Show me. For the next 2 hours, we weren't a mafia boss and a terrified waitress. We were a team. We sat on that sofa, our heads bent over my old notebook and his $1 million tablet. I pointed out the sequences, the way the numbers correlated with dates, the prefixes he used. A map began to form, not of the city, but of the shadow routes running through its ports. A line, a single, consistent road of containers, all flagged pharmaceutical supplies, all bypassing customs inspection, all originating from the same port. Pier Lattice 12, I said, pointing to the final destination that appeared on his screen. They're not just moving pills. They're moving the raw ingredients. They're making them here. Aurelio Voss looked at the screen, then at me. The admiration in his eyes was as intoxicating as any touch. He closed the tablet. Dane Riker is moving tonight, he said, but he's just a symptom. The disease is at Pier Lattice 12. He stood up, the pact settling between us in the quiet room. You were supposed to be safe for one night. That has changed. What has it changed to? 72 hours, he said. For the next 72 hours, we are not the hunted. He offered me his hand, not to comfort, but to seal the deal. I looked at his hand, strong, steady, and marked by a life I couldn't imagine. I placed my own in his. We are the hunters. The command vehicle was a black van, windowless and packed with glowing electronics, parked 2 blocks down from Pier Lattice 12 in the shadow of a rusted gantry crane. The rain hammered on the metal roof, a frantic, angry drumming that matched my pulse. I was alone in the back, wired in, a headset tight over my ears. I felt like I was sealed in a tin can, submerged in the harbor. "Ren, audio check." Mara's voice crackled, sharp and clear, in my ear. She was on foot, a shadow moving through the other shadows on the docks. "I hear you," I said, my voice sounding thin. "Loud and clear." I was staring at a bank of 4 monitors, their green-tinged night vision feeds showing the container yard from different, grainy angles. Aurelio was not in the van, and he was out there, coordinating the perimeter, a ghost I couldn't see but whose presence I felt in the disciplined silence of the radio channel. I was the hub. My job was to watch the manifests on my tablet, ready to match them with whatever Mara found inside container SK449B. Approaching the target, Mara whispered, "On feed 2, I saw her and 2 others, all in black, move with a liquid silence that didn't seem possible. They didn't use saws. A pair of long-handled bolt cutters made a single, dull snap, and the heavy lock fell away. The container door groaned open on its rusted hinges. Mara's helmet cam, feed 1, swept inside. I leaned in, my breath fogging the small screen. The van smelled of hot plastic, stale coffee, and ozone. "It's not pills," I breathed, my fingers tightening on the console. "Aurelio, are you hearing this?" "I hear it, Ren." His voice came back, impossibly calm, a bedrock beneath the static. "Talk to me." It's a kitchen." The camera beam found sacks of white powder stacked as high as my head, 50-gallon drums of chemicals with red warning labels, rolls and rolls of glossy, perfectly printed labels, the same ones I remembered from my sister's bottle, thousands of empty orange vials. "This is the precursor lab," Mara confirmed, her voice tight. "Raw materials, stamping machines. This is where they make the fakes." "Get the samples," Aurelio ordered, his voice clipping the words. "And get out. We have what we need." Mara's team moved, grabbing sample bags, a digital camera flashing. They were efficient, they were fast, and then all hell broke loose. An alarm, high-pitched and piercing, shattered the night, an electronic scream that ricocheted off the steel walls of the containers. Seconds later, massive floodlights snapped on, washing the yard in a harsh, artificial daylight, blinding my cameras with glare. "Compromised," Mara yelled over the comms, no longer whispering. "The yard guard he's bought, we're blown." On the monitors, I saw chaos. Men boiled out of a nearby warehouse, not uniformed guards, but orchid ring grunts in hoodies, armed with bats and pipes. Then I heard a deeper roar. A massive, yellow forklift, its tines lowered like a charging bull, suddenly slammed into the side of the container Mara was exiting. The helmet cam feed went sideways, a violent blur of concrete and sparks, and then darkness. "Mara!" I screamed into the mic. The feed crackled. "We're mobile," she shouted back, her breath ragged, the camera now showing only the blurred pavement as she ran. "They're running for the water, East Slip. They have a boat." "Aurelio, they're running east," I shouted, my hands flying over the keyboards, trying to switch to an angle of the docks. "They're heading for a boat." "I see them," he replied. The calm was gone. His voice was now the sound of sharp, breaking steel. A new feed suddenly patched onto my main monitor. It was a security camera, high on a pole, looking down at the East Slip. I saw two men leap from the pier into a sleek, low-profile speedboat. Its engine roared to life, a deep-throated sound of pure power. In the yard, I could still hear the forklift crashing into things, trying to block Mara's team. "They're getting away," I whispered, helpless, watching the speedboat tear away from the dock. It sent up a white rooster tail of spray as it headed for the narrow channel that led out of the inner harbor, toward the open bay and freedom. I looked at the digital clock on the monitor's overlay. 2:58 a.m. My mind flashed back to 1,000 closing shifts, to inventory counts, to cash-outs, to the rigid, non-negotiable schedules of a restaurant. "Wait," I said, leaning into the mic. "Aurelio, the tide gate, the bell tide lock system. It controls the channel." "What about it?" he snapped. He was running. I could hear the wind in his mic. "It's automated. The harbor master shift change is at 3 a.m. Every night, exactly at 3, for 15 minutes. The system goes from automated to manual override so the new crew can check the sensors. To do that, they have to close the gates." "They'll be through the channel by then." "No," I said, my voice rising with sudden certainty. "They won't. They close the inner harbor gate first, always. 10 minutes before the shift change, to stop container traffic during the handover. It's standard procedure. They're heading right for a dead end. If you can slow them down, just by 30 seconds, they'll be trapped." There was a half-second of silence on the line. Then, "Mara, straddle stacker, Bay 5, block the channel now." I heard a sound I couldn't identify, a monstrous, hydraulic groan, and then a crash that vibrated through my own console. On the dock camera, I saw the speedboat, which had been flying, suddenly swerve hard, its driver clearly panicking as something a forklift, a small crane. I couldn't tell, blocked its path. The boat lost its momentum, idling in confusion. "He's at the gate," I whispered, watching the feed. The driver was gesticulating, shouting. The massive submerged steel gate separating the inner harbor from the channel was closed. He was trapped, a high-powered boat in a bathtub. "We have them," Mara's voice said, suddenly right outside. "Voss has the boat." The van door slid open, and I jumped so hard I nearly ripped the headset off. Aurelio Voss slid into the seat beside me. He was drenched, rainwater streaming from his dark hair and the shoulders of his jacket. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were electric, bright with the thrill of the chase. He pulled his own earpiece out and looked at me, the dim green light of the monitors casting shadows across his face. A smile touched his lips. It was a rare, startling thing, a fractional lift at one corner of his mouth that transformed his entire face from a mask of control to something fiercely alive. "You just taught me a kitchen trick, Ren." I let out a shaky breath I hadn't known I was holding. It was just a closing shift procedure. "It was brilliant," but he said, the smile fading but the warmth remaining, held in his gaze. The moment was shattered by a sound I hadn't heard in days, a digital, chirping ringtone. It wasn't my new, clean phone. It was my old one, and Mara had given it back to me, sealed in that silver bag. But it was still in my messenger bag by my feet, and it was ringing. A FaceTime request, from blocked. My blood turned to ice. Aurelio saw the change in my expression, and his own went rigid, the victory vanishing. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Answer it." My hands were shaking. I fumbled the phone out of the bag. The screen was bright and jarring. I hit the green icon. Dane Riker's face filled the screen. He was laughing. He wasn't wet. He wasn't at the pier. He was somewhere dry, lit from below, making his face a grotesque mask. He was grinning, that same awful, proprietary grin from the rainfire. "Having fun, Rena," he sneered. "Playing cops and robbers with your new friends. Did you like the show I put on for you?" "What do you want? Dane?" My voice was a reedy whisper. "Just wanted to show you I kept my promise." He laughed again, a high-pitched, manic sound. The camera angle shifted. He was holding something up. A Zippo lighter. He sparked it, the flame jumping up, bright and ugly, and dangling from a small chain he held in his other hand, twisting slowly right above the flame, was a single, brass-colored key. "My key? The key to apartment 307. "It's a gift, baby," he said, his voice dropping to that mock-intimate purr that made my skin crawl. "A housewarming. Thought I'd warm the place up for you." He lowered the key until the flame was licking at the metal, making it glow. "He can't protect you everywhere. I'm always watching. Always." The call ended, leaving me staring at my own terrified reflection on the black screen. He hadn't just been in my apartment. He had taken a trophy. He had been watching. He knew. He knew I wasn't just running. He knew I was with someone fighting back, and he had turned it into a game. I was shaking, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. The victory at the pier, the trapped boat, the smile from Aurelio, it all evaporated, replaced by the cold, creeping realization that Dane wasn't just a stalker. He was a foot soldier in a war, and he had just marked me as his personal, #1 target. A large, warm hand settled on my shoulder. I looked up, startled. Aurelio hadn't moved. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes fixed on the dark phone in my hand, his jaw set so tight a muscle jumped, but his hand on my shoulder was heavy, steady, a solid anchor in the storm that was ripping me apart. "I am here," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was an absolute, it wasn't a comfort, it was a vow. I couldn't stop shaking, without thinking, without permission. I leaned forward just enough to press my forehead against the solid, warm wall of his chest. His jacket was damp and smelled of rain and the harbor, but beneath it, he was solid rock, unmoving. I stayed there for 1 heartbeat, 2. I felt his hand tighten on my shoulder. Then I pulled back, embarrassed, wiping my eyes on my sleeve. "We need to work." He didn't comment on the lapse. He didn't say it was okay. He just squeezed my shoulder once, a brief, affirming pressure, and then let his hand fall away, giving me back my space. "Mara is processing the men we caught," he said, his voice all business again, though laced with a new, cold anger. He picked up a tablet one of the team had recovered from the speedboat. "Let's see what they died protecting." He powered it on. The screen was full of encrypted transaction logs, but I didn't need to break the encryption. I recognized the format instantly. "It's a point-of-sale system," I said, pointing. "The same kind we used at the diner. Look, the transaction codes. They match the ones in my notebook." "But they're not container numbers," Aurelio said, frowning. "No," I said, my mind clicking back into place, grateful for the problem to solve, for the numbers and the logic. They're routing numbers, internal warehouse locations. Look at this one. WH7B, and this date. It's a recurring order. I scrolled, my fingers flying. It's scheduled for the next full moon. That's in 3 days. Warehouse 7B, Aurelio mused, typing the designation into his own system. A map appeared. Heliotrope Works, an old glass factory, abandoned. "That's the next shipment," I said, the pieces fitting together. "That must be the main lab. The one at the pier was just for processing." The van door slid open again. It was Mara. Her face was grim, her jacket smeared with grease. "The men are secure," she said, her voice flat. "But we have a problem." "Dane Riker is the problem," I said, my voice shaking again. "No," Mara said, her sharp eyes meeting Aurelio's. "He's not the one I'm worried about. The alarm. It wasn't triggered by the yard guard. The guard was a decoy." "What do you mean?" Aurelio asked. "The system was tripped remotely. Someone on our encrypted network signaled the ring the exact minute we breached the container. Not a minute before, not a minute after. A heavy, suffocating silence fell in the van, broken only by the sound of the rain and the hum of the electronics. A leak, an insider. They knew our exact timing, Mara said, her voice dropping. Only 5 people knew that, me, you, 2 team leads. And her, she jerked her chin at me. I felt the blood drain from my face, the accusation hitting me like a physical slap. Aurelio didn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on Mara, cold and unyielding as a glacier. She's not a suspect. She is the asset. Aurelio, Mara began to protest, stepping forward. She is the one who found the pier. She is the one who closed the trap. His voice was flat, absolute, leaving no room for argument. She is off the list. Do you understand me? Mara held his gaze for a long second, her loyalty warring with her suspicion. Finally, she gave a short, sharp nod. Understood. Then the leak is in our house, one of our own. Aurelio's face was carved from stone. Lock it down, Mara. Close circle. No one in or out of this operation without my direct authorization. Review all comms. I want to know who sold us out. He turned to me, but his eyes were distant, already moving pieces on a board I couldn't see. The game just changed. We aren't just hunting them anymore. They are hunting us. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated silence. The operation was now running from the top-floor apartment, which Mara had converted into a fortress of surveillance equipment. The leak in Aurelio's organization meant we were deaf and blind, relying only on the small, closed circle. Aurelio, Mara, and me. Aurelio insisted I see June. The Astor Community Health Center was a bright, clean facility in the uptown district, smelling of lemon polish and hope. Mara drove me. She didn't speak the whole way, but I saw her eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. She dropped me at the front, and 2 men I'd never seen before, who looked like bored orderlies, quietly flanked the hallway as I walked to June's room. June looked good, better than good. Her color was back. Her dark hair was shiny, and the cynical spark in her eyes had returned. She was sitting up in bed, arguing with a physical therapist about her discharge papers. Ren, she grinned, her face lighting up as she shooed the therapist away. What? Did you win the lottery? You look like you're sleeping in $1,000 suits. I realized I was still wearing the soft cashmere sweater Aurelio had left for me in the apartment. My waitress uniform long gone. Something like that, I said, forcing a smile, hugging her tight. We talked for 20 minutes. I told her I was safe, that I'd left the rainfire, that I was working on a project, a private contract. She didn't buy it for a second. You've got that look, June said, her smile fading as she studied my face. It's the same look you had when you were trying to hide that Dane Riker was stealing from the register. You're scared, but you're pretending you're in control. I am in control, June, for the first time. Are you, she asked, reaching for my hand, or is he... I froze. He who... Ren. I've been in this part of the city for 6 months. The Astor Center is nice, isn't it? Do you know who sits on its board who provided the anonymous donation that built this entire wing, Voss? My blood ran cold. This visit wasn't just for me. It was a message. He's the man you're with, isn't he? June said, her voice dropping. The one from the rainfire. I couldn't lie. I just nodded. June squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Ren, I've been on the receiving end of what men like that do. The Orchid Ring, the Voss Syndicate, they're just 2 different snakes fighting over the same territory. Don't you see he's just using you because you know Dane? He's not, I insisted, a little too quickly. He's different. He wants to stop them because of what they did to you. June's eyes softened with a deep, weary sadness. Then he's using me. Listen to me. Be careful. I'm glad you're safe, but never trust a man who wears a shiny crown, especially if he lives in the dark. While I was with June, Aurelio was meeting his opposite. He went to the abandoned St. Mercurial Church on the edge of the shipyard district, a massive Gothic skeleton of a building whose stained glass windows were mostly shattered. Aurelio went in alone. Sable Kern was already there, waiting. Sable, who was neither man nor woman, but a presence of sharp angles, expensive perfume, and utter ruthlessness. They were sitting on the ruined altar, casually swinging a leg, flanked by 4 of their best men. "Voss?" Sable called out, their voice echoing in the vast, empty nave. "To what do I owe the pleasure come to confess your sins?" Aurelio stopped in the center aisle, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the broken roof. "I came to tell you to stop." Sable laughed, a dry, hissing sound. "Stop what business? This city was dying until I brought in a new product. I'm providing a service." "You're selling poison to children," Aurelio said, his voice flat, carrying no echo. "You're killing families. My families. You broke the rules of Beltide." "Your rules," Sable corrected, sliding off the altar. "They're outdated. This is the new way. Less muscle. More chemistry. You're a relic. Aurelio, your father's Bronze Age codes don't apply anymore. This is your only warning. Shut down the Orchid Ring, walk away from Heliotrope Works, and I will let you leave my city." Sable smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "You're not in a position to give warnings. I hear you have a leak, a bad one. Must be hard, not knowing who to trust. Or is it that your little waitress pet is telling me things?" Aurelio didn't move. He didn't react. He just watched. Sable's smile faltered, annoyed by his control. "Fine. You want the city. You want the warehouse. Come and take it. Tomorrow night, Warehouse 7. Whoever is holding it by sunrise. Well, they get to hold the city." "I'll be there," Aurelio said. He turned his back on them, the ultimate insult, and walked out of the church, the sound of his footsteps disappearing into the street. When he returned to the apartment, his face was granite. He found me hunched over the listening equipment Mara had set up. "June's advice was to not trust you," I said, not looking up. "She's smart," he replied, standing behind me. "You shouldn't—" "Not completely. Sable thinks I'm the leak." "That's what I wanted them to think." He placed a hand on the back of my chair. "It keeps the suspicion off my own people, and it makes Sable underestimate you. They think you're a weakness. I know you're the weapon." "I found something," I said, hitting a button. "It's not Sable, it's Dane." I played the audio. Mara had managed to tap Dane's burner phone. It was a recording, muddy with static, of Dane talking to an unknown party. "Don't get it," Dane's voice whined. "Sable keeps me on the outside, handling the trash. I'm the one who knows the routes. I'm the one who built the network. Not them, I'll give you Sable. I'll give you the whole layout of 7B. All I want is, I want to be the new floor boss. I run the ring, you get Sable, everyone wins." I stopped the recording. "He's trying to sell out Sable to a third party. He wants to take over." "He's a rabid dog," Aurelio said, his voice laced with contempt. "He's not just a stalker. He's a traitor. It makes him unpredictable and dangerous." He stared at the screen, at the complex map of alliances we were building. Sable, Dane, and our own leak. The board is too crowded. He powered down the monitor. "We're leaving." "Leaving what about the warehouse? It's tomorrow night." "We're leaving for 6 hours," he said. "Mara will watch the network. You and we are going offline. We need to think, and we can't do it here." He took me to Osprey Key. I hadn't even known it existed. A tiny, rocky island about a mile off the coast, hidden by the perpetual fog of the bay. He piloted the small, fast boat himself, the salt spray cold on my face, washing away the smell of the city. The cabin was not a cabin. It was a small house of glass and old, warm cedar, built into the rock. Inside, a fire was already laid in a deep, stone hearth. There was no surveillance equipment. There were just shelves of old books, a vintage turntable, and a kitchen that smelled of salt and herbs. "This is yours, I stated, not a question. "My grandfather's," he said, shrugging out of his jacket. "It's the only place in Beltide that isn't connected." He was right. My new, clean phone had 0 bars. We were cut off. I walked to the kitchen, drawn by instinct. It was stocked. Fresh pasta, seafood on ice, wine. "I'm hungry," I said, realizing it was true. I hadn't eaten in I didn't know how long. "Good," he said. We cooked. We didn't talk about Dane or Sable or the leak. We cooked scallop linguine. He was clumsy in the kitchen, his large, controlled hands awkward with a knife. "You're going to bruise the garlic," I chided, taking it from him. "What's the difference?" "The difference between food and fuel," I said, crushing the clove with the flat of the blade. He watched me, a small, curious smile on his face. He opened the wine, a deep, expensive red. I grabbed an apron from a hook. It was a single, large, dark blue one. I started to tie it, but he put his hand out. "Let me," he said. I turned, and he tied the strings behind my back. His fingers were warm, brushing the small of my back. I held my breath. He didn't pull away. He just rested his hands on my hips for a second, his thumbs drawing small, involuntary circles. "We'll ruin our clothes," I whispered. "It's just one apron," he said, his voice rough. "Then we'll share it." I untied the neck loop, looped it over his head, and then tied the waist strings behind his back. So the apron was a strange, shared shield between us. We stood chest to chest, bound by a piece of canvas, the air thick with the smell of lemon zest, butter, and the heat from the stove. "This is inefficient," he murmured, his eyes on my mouth. "Very," I agreed, not moving. We ate on the wide porch, overlooking the black, restless sea. The wind was sharp, whipping my hair across my face. He had a glass of wine. I had tea. He wore a simple, dark sweater, the compass tattoo on his neck hidden by the collar. "My family has a code," he said quietly, swirling the wine in his glass. "My grandfather built this city on it. We protect the innocent. We don't deal in poison. We don't harm families. We maintain the balance. We are the wall that keeps the real monsters out." "Like Sable Kern," I said. "Like Sable Kern." He looked at me, his gaze heavy in the moonlight. "They don't just sell fake drugs. Ren, they sell death. They sell it to people like your sister. That's not business. That's a plague. And my job, my duty, is to purge it." "A duty," I repeated. I looked at his face. The firelight from the cabin was catching the planes of his cheeks, but his eyes were in shadow. I saw a faint white line, stark against the tan of his skin, just at his collarbone, where his sweater had dipped. My hand moved on its own. I reached out, my fingers tracing the puckered line of the scar. It was old. Does it ever stop? He flinched, not at my touch, but at the question. He covered my hand with his own, pressing my fingers flat against the scar, against the warmth of his skin. "Does what stop?" "The duty," I whispered, my eyes locked on his. "The weight. Do you ever get tired of being strong?" His expression cracked. It was a tiny, infinitesimal fracture. He didn't speak, but his eyes gave me the answer. Yes. It was a tiredness that went bone deep, a weariness I recognized from 1,000 double shifts, from a lifetime of running. But his was the weariness of a man who could never, ever allow himself to fall, because the entire city would fall with him. In that moment, he wasn't the Voss, he wasn't the boss or the myth or my protector. He was just Aurelio, a man, carrying an impossible weight. The wind chimes on the corner of the porch, made of old, blue glass, clinked together, a sound as fragile and sharp as the moment itself. We were so close. Our knees were almost touching. The silence was full of the words we weren't saying, the smell of the sea and the wine and the lingering scent of garlic and lemon on our hands. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to my lips. My breath caught, my heart hammering a rhythm that matched the wind chimes. Then he stopped. He pulled back, a fraction of an inch, then a full half step. He broke the contact. his hand leaving mine, creating a space of cold air between us. He was giving me the choice. He was giving me the power Dane had always stolen. He stood there, waiting, and he didn't move. He just waited, his eyes asking the question his pride would not let him speak. He had made his move by retreating. The next move was mine, and he had stepped back, creating a chasm of cold, sea-blasted air between us. He had given me the choice. The wind chimes sang their fragile, glassy song, the only sound besides the crash of the waves on the rocks below. He waited, his hands loose at his sides, his face a mask of control in the moonlight, but his eyes were exposed, revealing the man who was tired of being strong, the man who was asking for something without speaking. My heart was a fist in my chest. I had spent my entire life running from men who took, Dane took, my old bosses took, the world took. This man, who held the entire city in his hand, was offering. I took one step, closing the distance he had created. I didn't reach for his mouth. I didn't throw myself against his chest. I lifted my hand slowly and wove my fingers through his. His hand was large, warm, and scarred, his fingers closed around mine, a grip of surprising, instant possession, as if he'd been waiting for that one. Simple contact. I didn't let go. Instead, I tugged, just once, a silent command, "Come with me." He understood. He didn't speak. He simply followed. I led him off the cold, exposed porch, sliding the glass door shut behind us. I pulled him back into the kitchen, the room that felt like ours. The fire in the hearth had warmed the cedar walls, and the room was filled with the lingering, domestic smells of our dinner lemon, butter, and the sharp, clean scent of white wine. The soft, yellow light from under the cabinets pooled on the floor. A safe, warm island in the dark house. We stopped in the center of the room, still bound by the shared dark blue apron. It was a ridiculous, intimate tether. He watched me, his gaze intense, as I reached up, my fingers brushing the fabric over his collarbone to find the knot of the neck loop. I fumbled with it for a moment, my hands not quite steady, and then it came loose. I pulled the loop over his head, the fabric sliding against his hair, the apron loosened, falling from my shoulders. I stepped back, and he untied the strings at his back. The apron, our shared shield, fell to the wooden floor between us with a soft, final thump. A period at the end of a long sentence. He didn't move. I stepped forward again, into the space I had just made. I put my hands on his chest. I could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart under my palm, a slow, powerful rhythm. I rose on my toes, and I kissed him. It was slow. At first, it was just gratitude. It was a thank you for the coat in the rain, for the hand on my back in the kitchen, for seeing my sister's pain as his own. It was a thank you for, just once, letting me be the one to make the choice. His lips were firm, tasting faintly of the red wine and the salt from the air. He didn't kiss me back. Not for a long, agonizing second. He just accepted it, his hands remaining at his sides, his body rigid. Then, as I started to pull away, thinking I had made a terrible mistake, his hand came up, fast and sure, to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me in place. His other hand found my waist, pulling me tight against him, erasing every inch of space, every doubt. And he kissed me back. It was no longer slow, and it was not gratitude. It was a sudden, devastating flood of all the things we hadn't said on the porch. It was the tension of the last 2 days, the fear from the phone call, the raw, primal anger at Dane, at Sable, at the entire rotten world. We found a shared rhythm, a breath that moved between us. His control was staggering. He was a man who held an empire, and I felt that power in the way he held me, as if I were something infinitely precious, yet with a strength that left no doubt he could break me. But he wouldn't. His hands, which had been so sure, began to move. They slid from my waist to my arms, up to my shoulders, his thumbs brushing the line of my jaw. Every time I shivered, every time my breath hitched, he would pause. He would pull back. Just a fraction. his eyes searching mine in the dim light, a silent, intense question. Is this okay? And I would answer, not with words, but by rising on my toes again, by letting my own hands, which had been pressed flat against his chest, slide up to curl around his neck. I held him, pulling him closer, giving him my clear, unmistakable yes. We moved, not in a rush, but in a slow, connected drift, from the kitchen's warm light to the shadows of the living room. Each step was a discovery, a breath taken and given. My back met the cool, smooth wood of the door frame. I stopped there, my head tilted back to look at him. He was all shadow and plains, his face carved by the dim light from the fire. His chest was a solid wall of heat, a point of reference in a world that had been spinning for days. I felt, for the first time since I'd seen Dane outside the rain fire, completely and utterly safe. I breathed in his scent, the faint, clean citrus of bergamot from his shirt, the fading smell of wood smoke, and the unique, metallic, and warm scent of his skin. He leaned his forehead against mine, his breathing rough, his voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, hoarse thing I had never heard before, a rumble that vibrated through my hands. Tell me if you want to stop. It was the final test, the final key. He was giving me the out that no one, especially not Dane, ever had. I slid my hands into his hair, my voice breathless but firm. Don't stop. The thick woolen blanket from the back of the sofa, the one that smelled of cedar and thyme, became our world. It was a small, dark sky we pulled over us, shutting out the city, the operation, the coming war. The rain, which had been holding its breath, began to fall again. A steady, insistent drumming on the roof and the glass. It was a soundtrack for the quiet sounds that followed the soft, heavy sigh of the sofa cushions, the rasp of wool against skin, the murmur of a name, the sharp, indrawn breath. The fire in the hearth crackled, a loyal, steady witness, casting faint, dancing shadows on the walls. The house on the rock, cut off from the world, held its breath and kept our secret. Dawn came as a thin, gray, reluctant line, separating the dark sea from the even darker sky. I woke first. I was warm, tangled in the blanket and his limbs. My head was on his shoulder, his arm a heavy, protective weight across my waist. Sometime in the night, in this one, safe place, he had finally allowed himself to truly sleep. I watched him, my heart doing a slow, strange ache. The tension was gone from his face, the hard lines of the boss, the man who decides things for all of Beltide, were smoothed away by sleep. The faint, ever-present frown between his brows was gone, in the pale, watery morning light. He looked younger, the mask of command dissolved, leaving behind only the man. Carefully, so as not to wake him, I lifted my head. I looked at the scar on his collarbone, the white, puckered line I had touched just hours before. It was a map of his duty, the physical mark of the weight he carried. I leaned down and pressed a light, soft kiss to it. It was a silent promise, a vow. I see you, all of you. His eyes opened. He didn't startle. He didn't move. He just watched me. His gaze clear, the harbor gray of his eyes soft and lucid in the morning light. Then he smiled. It was not the rare, controlled lifting of his lips I had seen in the van. This was a real, slow, unguarded smile, one that transformed his face, that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. It was not the Voss, it was Aurelio, and he was, in this one moment, simply a man in love. The buzz was a violence in the quiet room. It was his clean phone, the one Mara had given him, vibrating angrily on the hardwood floor by the sofa. The sound was a betrayal. The peace shattered, the real world flooding in, cold and immediate. We both looked at it, the black, insistent rectangle. The spell was broken. He sighed, the smile vanishing as he reached for it. He read the screen, and I watched the boss slide back into place, the armor reforming, the muscles in his jaw setting. "It's time," he said, his voice once again the gravel and velvet command, "Warehouse 7B, tonight." We stood, the blanket falling away, the cold air a sudden, unwelcome shock. We didn't speak. We moved with a shared, sober purpose. We cleaned the kitchen, washed the 2 plates, the 2 wine glasses, and the single pot. We put everything back exactly as we had found it. We locked the cabin, leaving the island to the gulls and the wind, locking our secret away with it. A perfect 6-hour parenthesis in our lives. We were back on the small, fast boat, the engine thrumming, the gray, misty skyline of Beltide looming ahead of us. The war was waiting. He spoke, his voice cutting through the sound of the motor. He reached into the deep pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a folding knife, its handle made of a dark, polished wood that felt warm in my palm. It was perfectly balanced. He pressed it into my hand, his fingers closing around mine for a brief, hard second. "This isn't to win," he said, his eyes meeting mine, the iron back in his gaze, the lever from the island gone. "This is to come back." The dock was cold and gray, the brief, stolen piece of Osprey Key evaporating like the morning fog. The island was a dream. This was the reality. We walked quickly from the boat slip to the black sedan parked in the private harbor lot. Mara was waiting, leaning against the driver's door, her face impassive, but her eyes were tight with an anxiety I hadn't seen on her before. "Trouble," she said, not as a greeting. "Network's been buzzing. They're jumpy. Something's happening before tonight." "Get us back to the apartment," Aurelio said, his voice clipped. "All business." He slid into the back and I followed, the knife he'd given me a heavy, cold weight in my jacket pocket. Mara started the engine. She was pulling out of the parking space, her eyes checking the mirrors in a frantic, systematic way. "We've got company." I look back. I don't see anyone. "Not behind us," she said, her voice a low growl. 9 o'clock. Hard. A blue, beaten-up pickup truck, the kind you see on every dock in Beltide, was accelerating, coming straight at us from a side lane. Its engine roaring. It wasn't slowing down. It was aiming to T-bone us, right where I was sitting. "Brace," Aurelio yelled. He threw himself across me, his body a solid, living shield, crushing me into the soft leather of the seat. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands grabbing his jacket, bracing for the inevitable, deafening impact of steel and glass. It never came. Instead, I heard the tortured scream of tires on asphalt. Mara had slammed the accelerator, not the brake, launching our sedan forward while the truck simultaneously swerved, its brakes locking. It skidded to a stop, angled perfectly to block the exit, its grille just inches from where our door had been a second before. My heart was a hummingbird in my throat. Aurelio didn't move for a second, his weight a heavy, breathing reassurance on top of me. The truck door flew open. A man got out, his hands raised, his face a mask of panic. "Aurelio, boss, thank God I caught you." Aurelio pushed himself off me, his face dark with a fury I had never seen. He rolled down the window, the cold air a slap. It was a man in a sharp, expensive suit that looked wildly out of place in the battered truck. Lionel Crest. I knew him from the command center. He was the numbers guy, the financial brain, the one who handled the syndicate's legitimate fronts. He was Aurelio's right hand in the world of spreadsheets and stock markets. "Lionel," Aurelio's voice was arctic, "what in the name of God are you doing?" "I'm sorry, boss, I had to stop you," Lionel said, walking quickly to the car, his eyes wide. He was breathing hard. "The network is compromised. I mean, really compromised. They're moving. They know about you two. They know you were off-grid. I came to get you, to bring you to the secondary site." He was babbling, his composure, which I'd seen in the apartment, completely gone. He kept wiping his damp palms on his suit trousers, and he wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on Aurelio, desperate and pleading. Mara's voice cut in, sharp and suspicious over the car's internal comm. "Why the truck? Lionel, your Mercedes is faster." It was all I could grab. he stammered. "It was parked closer. I didn't have time to think. I just drove." Mara's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. Her gaze was flat. She didn't believe him. Neither did I. "Get in," Aurelio ordered. His voice clipped. "We go back to Harbor Block C." "No, boss, that's the first place they'll look," Lionel protested. "Get in the car." Lionel flinched, nodded, and ran around to the passenger side. Sliding in next to Mara, the car smelled of his fear, a sour, coppery scent. We drove, Mara taking a winding, evasive route through the dockyard's back lanes. The silence in the car was thick, broken only by Lionel's shallow breathing. Aurelio was staring out the window, but he wasn't looking at the scenery. He was watching Lionel's reflection in the glass. I looked at Mara. She was doing something with one hand on the small, built-in console, typing a series of commands I couldn't see. "Mara," Aurelio said quietly. "Already on it," she replied, her voice just as low. She was setting a trap. She was planting bait. She keyed a message into her own encrypted comm unit, one that Lionel, as part of the inner circle, would be able to see on his device if he was watching. "Rendezvous changed. All assets to Pier 9. Grid Delta. Asset Ren is compromised. Neutralize on site." A fake location, a fake order, a test. We just had to wait. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. I watched the digital clock on the dashboard. 10 minutes. I watched Lionel's reflection, and he was trying to look calm, but his knee was bouncing, a frantic, jittery rhythm. Then, Mara's hand, which had been resting on the gear shift, picked up a small, handheld radio scanner she kept mounted by her leg. She turned the dial. Static. And then, a voice, distorted, coming from the Orchid Ring's frequency, the one we'd been monitoring. "Repeat, Pier 9, Grid Delta, confirmed. We'll take her there. The boss will be pleased." Mara's breath hissed out between her teeth. Lionel. It was Lionel, the numbers man, the quiet, efficient one. He was the leak. He knew. The second the radio squawked, he knew he was made. It all happened in one fluid, heart-stopping second. "Now, Mara," Aurelio shouted. Mara slammed the brakes, throwing us all forward against our seatbelts, while simultaneously hitting the internal door lock button. Lionel didn't go for the door, and he was a finance guy, but he was still syndicate. He pulled a small, silver pistol from an ankle holster, shouting, "Sable owns this city, old man." He twisted in his seat, aiming the gun not at Mara, but at the back seat, at Aurelio. Mara's hand, which had been on the radio, shot across the console. She didn't grab the gun. She grabbed Lionel's wrist, slamming it upward with all her force. The gun went off. The sound was deafening, a physical punch of air in the small, enclosed car. The rear window, inches from my head, didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed, a neat, frosted circle appearing where the bullet had struck and been stopped by the armored glass. The car filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Lionel roared, fighting Mara for the gun. Aurelio was already moving, lunging over the front seat. The car was a cage of flailing limbs and shouted curses. The passenger door suddenly ripped open. Mara must have unlocked it. A second pickup, this one black, had screeched to a halt beside us. Two of Sable's men were piling out. "Oh, go, go!" Lionel screamed, slamming his elbow into Mara's face. She fell back, blood pouring from her nose. Lionel tumbled out of the car and into the arms of his new friends, who immediately opened fire on us. Aurelio wasn't trying to shoot back. He was shoving me, hard, onto the floor of the car. "Stay down, Ren." He was halfway out the rear door, using the heavy armored panel as a shield, returning fire with a large, black pistol I hadn't even known he was carrying. The sound was deeper, more authoritative than Lionel's. One of Sable's men went down, clutching his knee. The other one panicked, firing wildly. I heard a sound, a wet, heavy thud, and Aurelio grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain that cut me to the bone. He staggered, falling back into the seat, his pistol clattering to the floor mat. "Aurelio? Drive, Mara, drive," he bellowed, clutching his shoulder. The tires screamed, the sedan leaped forward, and the last thing I saw was Lionel, his face a white mask of fury, being dragged into the black truck as it sped away in the opposite direction. "He's hit," I said, my voice shaking as I scrambled up from the floor. "He's hit." Aurelio was leaning against the door, his eyes squeezed shut, his face pale. A dark, spreading stain was soaking the shoulder of his jacket. The smell of his blood, coppery and hot, filled the car, overpowering the gunpowder. "It's just a graze," he ground out, his teeth clenched. "The hell it is," Mara said, her voice thick from her broken nose. She was driving with one hand, holding a bloody rag to her face with the other. "We can't go to the apartment. We can't go to a hospital." "Port watch," Aurelio managed to say. "Operations room. It's clean." My hands were shaking, but the knife in my pocket was a hard, cold reality. I tore open his jacket. The bullet had ripped through the muscle of his shoulder. A ragged, ugly tear that was bleeding. A lot. "Pressure," I said, my voice coming out hard, unrecognizable. I ripped a piece of his expensive shirt, balled it up, and shoved it, hard, into the wound. He cried out, a raw, strangled sound. "Good," I snarled, pushing harder, my own fear and rage combining into a cold, diamond-hard fury. "It hurts. It means you're alive. You listen to me. You are not allowed to die. June is waiting. I am waiting. And no one else in this goddamn city is going to make them pay for what they did. You live. Do you understand me?" I looked up, and my eyes met his. They were glazed with pain, but he was seeing me. He was seeing the girl from the rain fire, the girl who had hidden behind him, and she was gone. He gave a single, pained nod. We skidded to a halt at the Port Watch building, a nondescript concrete bunker near the main cranes. Mara got him out, his arm slung over her shoulder, and I walked behind, covering our retreat, my eyes scanning every window, every doorway. Mara slammed the heavy steel door to the operations room, and Aurelio threw the deadbolts. We were in a small, windowless room, smelling of old electronics and stale air, lined with blinking, dead-end security monitors. Aurelio slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor, leaving a crimson smear on the beige paint. "First aid kit," I snapped at Mara, who was already grabbing a metal box from the wall. I was packing the wound with gauze, my hands now steady, soaked in his blood, when we heard it. Heavy footsteps running in the hall outside, then a pounding on the steel door. "They followed us," Mara whispered, drawing her own gun, her bloody face a terrifying mask. "Lionel knew," Aurelio grunted, trying to push himself up. "He knew all the safe houses. He sent them." The pounding stopped, a new sound, a high-pitched whir, a drill. They were drilling the lock. "We have 2 minutes max," Mara said. I looked around the room. It was bare. Desks, chairs, electronics, a small kitchenette in the corner, a coffee maker, a microwave, a rack of supplies. My eyes landed on a large tin canister of olive oil and a box of industrial-sized pepper shakers used for the staff canteen. My brain, trained by years of closing shifts, of cleaning up messes, of anticipating chaos, made the leap. "The vents," I said, grabbing the pepper. I ran to the main air conditioning intake vent and dumped the entire box of black pepper into the grate. "Ren, what?" Mara started. "The door," I said, grabbing the 3-gallon tin of olive oil. "When they breach, they'll be focused on us. They won't look down." I ran to the door, twisted the cap off the oil, and dumped the entire contents on the linoleum floor, creating a slick, wide pool right where they would enter. The drill punched through. The lock mechanism clattered to the floor. "Get him up," I hissed at Mara. "There." I pointed to a steel service ladder that led up to a ceiling hatch. "Go." Mara grabbed Aurelio, hauling him to his feet. He was gray, his breathing shallow. He stumbled toward the ladder. The door flew open. 2 of Sable's men, armed with shotguns, piled in, shoulder to shoulder, their eyes blinded by the transition from the bright hallway to the dim room. "Now!" I screamed. They took one step. Their heavy combat boots hit the olive oil. It was like a cartoon. Their feet went out from under them, and they went down hard. A crash of men and weapons. One of them, reflexively, squeezed his trigger, letting off a blast that tore a hole in the ceiling, filling the room with plaster dust and the smell of sulfur. At the exact same moment, the pepper hit them. The air conditioning kicked on, and a cloud of fine black, aerosolized pepper shot out of the vent directly into their faces. They didn't scream in pain, they just choked, deep, gagging, involuntary coughs, their eyes squeezing shut, their hands dropping their weapons to claw at their faces. I didn't wait to watch. I was already halfway up the ladder, Aurelio's arm on my shoulder, Mara pulling from above. We burst out onto the flat, gravel roof, into the cold, damp air. A tugboat in the channel below let out a long, deafening blast of its horn, a sound so loud it shook my teeth. It was the perfect cover, drowning out the sound of the hatch slamming shut, the shouts from below, our feet pounding on the gravel. We ran to the edge of the roof, where a fire escape led down into a dark, narrow alley between two warehouses. We were safe, for now. Mara was already on her phone, calling for an extraction, her voice a low, furious murmur. Aurelio was leaning heavily on me, his breathing ragged. "We have to go after him," Mara said, her eyes wild. "Lionel, we have to hunt him down, now, before he vanishes." "No," I said. They both looked at me. Aurelio was pale, his eyes unfocused, but his attention was sharp. "Ren," he whispered. "No," I said again, my voice ringing with a new, cold authority. "He's a traitor. He's scared. He's running. And he's running to someone. He's running to Sable. He's going to lead us straight to Heliotrope Works. We don't chase him. We let him punch our ticket." It was my first tactical decision. It was not born of training, but of a waitress's instinct. You don't chase the customer who runs out on a bill. You wait for them to come back, because they always leave something important behind. Aurelio stared at me. The pain was making his vision swim, but I saw the look in his eyes, the shock, the reevaluation, and then the deep, profound respect. It was more powerful than any praise, more intimate than any kiss. He reached out, his good hand finding Mara's arm. "Get the van," he ordered, the mobile command, and put Ren in the chair. The command van was a different kind of prison, hot, cramped, and smelling of antiseptic and ozone. Mara had cleaned and bound Aurelio's shoulder. He was pale, his bad arm immobilized in a makeshift sling, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He sat in the main command chair, but I was at the console. My decision in the alley had changed the air between us. I was no longer the package. I was a partner. We had the data from the pier, the tablet from the boat, and my old notebook from the diner. For an hour, I worked, my fingers flying over the console, the waitress's knack for memorizing complex orders now applied to encrypted shipping logs. "You were right," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the electronic hum. Lionel was the numbers man, but he wasn't just leaking. He was stealing. "Explain," Aurelio said, his voice tight with pain. Dane's notebook wasn't just tracking product, it was tracking payments, the container codes. They don't just match cargo, they match wire transfers, identical sequences. I pulled up two screens, side by side, on one. The shipping manifest for a container of industrial solvents from Asia. On the other, a bank transfer for $80,000 from an unknown account. Every time a solvent shipment bypassed customs, I explained, a transfer was made, not to a syndicate account, not to a known Orchid Ring account, to this. I typed in the name, the Glass Harbor Trust. "A shell," Aurelio said, his voice a low growl. "Registered to a post office box in the financial district." "It's the money," I whispered, a cold thrill running through me. "It's the brain. Sable Kern isn't just a drug dealer. They're an accountant, and Lionel was their inside man, skimming from both sides. We don't just have their lab. Aurelio, we have their bank." "Good," Mara said, her voice a rasp from the driver's seat. "We have their money. Now we just need to find them, before they find us." "We don't need to find them," I said, looking at Aurelio. "We need to make them come to us, or rather, we need to make them go exactly where we want them to." He saw the idea dawning on my face. "Lionel," he said. "He's still listening." "He thinks he's a ghost," I said, my pulse quickening. "He's monitoring our secure channels, feeding everything to Sable, proving his loyalty, so we feed him." I started typing, building a new manifest, a fake one. "A priority shipment children's vitamins from a humanitarian aid group. It's arriving tonight, fast-tracked by Voss order." "Why vitamins?" Mara asked, her broken nose making her sound skeptical. "Because it's the perfect cover," I said, my mind racing. "It's high value, but looks legitimate. Lionel will see it as a blind spot in Aurelio's network, a shipment he won't check too closely. But we add a little spice." I typed a note into the fake internal memo. "Alert all vitamin pallets to be tagged with UV marker ink for internal audit. Voss authorization." Aurelio smiled, a grim, painful expression. "The bait, he'll see the memo. Think the shipment is a trap for him." "Exactly," I agreed. "He has to warn Sable to stay away from the vitamins, and to prove his value, he'll have to tell them where the real shipment, the one he's diverting, is going. He'll give them a new location, his own location." Mara's fingers flew, sending the poison data into the network. While we waited, Aurelio used his own clean phone, the one he'd had on the island. He made a single call. His voice changed. It became formal, cold, the voice of a citizen reporting a crime. "Yes, I'll hold. Director, thank you for taking my call. I'm afraid I have a sensitive matter. It concerns the Metropolitan Commerce Tribunal." "Yes. A significant violation of shipping ordinances. I have manifests, bank records, an organization calling itself the Orchid Ring. I believe a full-scale raid is warranted tonight. I will, of course, have my own private security on hand to assist your officers." He listened, then nodded. "Thank you. Director, your discretion is appreciated." He hung up. "The Metropolitan Commerce Tribunal," I asked. "Are they—" "The tribunal," Aurelio said, a flicker of his old, cold humor in his eyes, "is a 3-person office that handles fishing licenses, but the director owes me for a youthful indiscretion involving a senator's daughter. He will be at home, with his family, all night, and in the morning he will sign any report I put in front of him." "So who is raiding the warehouse?" "Mara's team," he said, dressed in the tribunal's official tactical gear. "We're not just wiping out an enemy tonight, Ren. We're seizing their assets. We're ending them with customs forms and bank seizures. We're making them criminals, not martyrs. We're taking the Glass Harbor Trust." He looked at me, the strategic mind clicking back into place. "Mara will take you to the apartment. You'll be safe there. You've done your part." "No." The word was flat. It hung in the hot air of the van. Both he and Mara turned to look at me. "Ren," Aurelio said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That is not a request. You are the primary target. I cannot have you in the field." "You won't have me in the field," I said, standing up, my knees bumping the console. "You'll have me at your side. I'm not the asset anymore. I'm not the package. I'm the one who found the pier. I'm the one who built the trap for Lionel. I'm the one who knows the books." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Dane isn't hunting me. I am hunting him. I am hunting Sable. This is my fight. It's for my sister. You told me you protect families. Well, this is my family's justice, and I will not be locked in a safe house while you deliver it. No one tells my story if I'm not there to see it end." I stared him down. I saw the war in his eyes, the boss, who needed to protect his asset, the man, who was wounded and furious, and Aurelio, the man I had kissed on the island, who was seeing, for the first time, the person he'd unleashed. He was silent for a long time. "You're right," he said finally, his voice rough. "It's too dangerous. So is the rest of my life if we don't finish this." I shot back. "I'm not asking. Aurelio, I'm telling you, I'm going." He held my gaze, and I did not blink. He saw the steel, the part of me that had been forged in the fire of the last 3 days. He gave a sharp, pained nod. "Mara, get her a vest. Slim profile, Under Armour, and a private comms unit. She does not leave my side. Not for 1 second. Is that understood?" "Boss," Mara started to protest. "Is that understood?" he repeated, his voice iron. Mara looked at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and a new, grudging respect. "Understood." As if summoned, my new phone buzzed, a text message from a blocked ID. My blood, which had been running hot with adrenaline, turned to ice. "I know you're with him. I know you think you're smart, but I know your past. Every dirty job, every lie. Meet me tonight. Solstice Lantern Ball, Marinara Museum, 9 o'clock, come alone. Or I tell everyone at the Rainfire, your little sister, and the entire city who Ren Calder really is. I'm waiting." I handed the phone to Aurelio. His face, which had been pale from the pain, flushed with a dark, violent anger. "No, it's a trap. He's pulling you away from the main event. I'll have him picked up." He reached for his phone. "Don't," I said, my mind racing. Seeing the move behind the move. He's not stupid. He's desperate. He's not with Sable right now. He's making his own play. His ego can't handle that. I'm not scared anymore. He needs to see me afraid. "Ren, I will not let you—" "You won't," I cut him off. "We'll use it. We take him off the board. Tonight, before the warehouse. He wants to meet in public, fine. He wants to expose me." I met Aurelio's furious gaze. "I'll pull him into the light, Aurelio, and you will turn it off." He hated it. I could see the refusal in the set of his jaw, but he also saw the cold, brutal logic. He put his phone down and took my hand. His skin was hot. "No comms," he said, his voice low, urgent. "He'll be looking for an earpiece. We need signals." He tapped the center of my palm, twice, with his index finger, a sharp, quick 1, 2. "Danger, you abort. You run to Mara. Understood." I nodded. He met my eyes, then gave one, slow, deliberate blink. "Retreat. Fall back to me. Immediately." I nodded again. I lifted my free hand and I rested it, just for a second, on his good shoulder. A light, firm pressure. And this. He covered my hand with his gaze softening for just a fraction of a second. "That means I am here." Mara was already on the comms, her voice a low, furious murmur, planning the new operation. "It's the Solstice Lantern Ball. The main delivery of floating lanterns is scheduled for 9:05 through the rear catering gate. My team will be in the delivery truck. That gate will be open for exactly 90 seconds. Mara produced a garment bag from a hidden compartment. "You can't go looking like that." I changed in the cramped, hot cabin of the van, pulling the simple, sleeveless black dress over my skin. Mara strapped the thin, flexible comms unit to my back, a wire of ice against my spine. I slipped my feet into a pair of low, black heels. The knife Aurelio had given me was strapped to my thigh, cold and alien. When I stepped back into the main cabin, Aurelio was ready. He was wearing a dark suit, his wounded arm in a formal, black silk sling that looked like a deliberate, fashionable choice. He looked every inch the sponsor, the patron, the king, pale, dangerous, and electric. "You're ready," he said, his voice rough. He handed me a heavy, cream-colored invitation, Voss Syndicate, Table 5. As we prepared to leave, his clean phone buzzed, a message from Mara's network, from one of Aurelio's loyal captains, the one Lionel trusted. The bait was taken. The message was a forward from Lionel. "Sable confirms. Vitamin shipment is a trap. UV tagged. All product is being diverted. Full convergence at Heliotrope Works. After the ball, midnight, this is it." Aurelio looked at me, a cold fire in his eyes. "The game is set." We exited the van a block from the museum. The air was warm, and the sky was filled with the glow of 1,000 paper lanterns. Aurelio walked through the front entrance, a god in a tuxedo, drawing the light, the attention, the whispers. I slipped in through the crowd, just another woman in a black dress. He went left, toward the donors. I went right, toward the bar. My eyes scanned the room, over the champagne glasses and the polite laughter, hunting for the one face that had haunted my nightmares. The solstice ball had begun. The Marinarum Museum was a glittering, fragile lie. Hundreds of guests, dressed in silks and jewels, drifted through the grand hall, their laughter tinkling like the champagne in their glasses. Above them, a galaxy of paper lanterns, part of the solstice ball's centerpiece, floated, casting a warm, golden glow on the polished marble. I moved through the crowd, a ghost in a simple black dress. I was a waitress again, observing. But this time I was not serving. I was hunting. I found him by the main bar, just as I knew I would, Dane Riker, when he was wearing a tuxedo that was too tight, his neck spilling over the collar. He held a martini, the glass looking delicate in his thick hand, and he was smiling. That sharp, pointed grin he always wore when he thought he had won. He saw me, and his smile widened. He left his conversation and cut me off near a high, arched window. "Ren, baby," he whispered, his voice a slick caress that made my skin crawl. He was drunk, high on his own perceived power. "Look at you. You clean up real nice. Tired of the old man already." I said nothing. The knife on my thigh was a cold, sharp secret. "It's not too late," he purred, leaning closer, his cologne sour and cheap. "Sable's impressed with me. I'm moving up. That old, broken-down Voss. He's finished. Come back to me. I'll take care of you, like I always did." The audacity of it, the casual ownership in his voice, burned away the last of my fear. I smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You, Dane," I said, my voice clear and carrying, loud enough for the people nearby to pause their conversations. "You want to talk about moving up?" I pulled my new, clean phone from the small clutch Mara had given me. I didn't dial. I hit the bright red record icon on the audio app and held it up between us. The microphone pointed at his face. "Tell us all about it, Dane," I said, my voice ringing with a new, cold clarity. "Tell these nice people how you moved up. Tell them how many people you've killed with your fake pills. Tell them what you did to my sister." His face, which had been flushed with arrogance, went a pale, ugly white. Rage flashed in his eyes. "You little—" He lunged for me, his hand raised. He was too late. Across the grand hall, on the mezzanine balcony above, I saw Aurelio. He was standing in the shadows, his black sling blending with his suit, a silent, furious guardian. He saw Dane's movement. He lifted his good hand, his index and middle finger raised, and made a single, sharp, cutting motion. The signal. The grand chandeliers died, the music, a string quartet, screeched to a halt. The museum plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness. But not a complete darkness. The lanterns, the hundreds of paper lanterns powered by small, independent batteries, remained lit. They floated in the vast, open space, a sea of glowing, orange and yellow orbs, casting a chaotic, hellish light on the panicking crowd. People screamed, they ran. In the sudden chaos, I heard other sounds, the scrape of boots on marble, the zipline whisper of a descending rope, the short, muffled thump of a body hitting the floor. Mara's team. They were using the blackout, not to escape, but to hunt. Grabbing the secondary targets, Sable's accountants, their political contacts who were scattered among the guests. A brutal, strong arm locked around my throat from behind. "He thinks he's smart," Dane screamed into my ear, his voice high and frantic. He dragged me backward, his body a solid shield behind mine. "He'll watch me walk right out of here." "Let her go." Aurelio's voice. It cut through the screams, calm and absolute. He was there, 10 paces away, a silhouette against the sea of lanterns. His good hand was at his side, his pistol held loosely, pointed at the floor. He was not aiming. One step closer, Voss, and I snap her neck. Dane yelled, his arm tightening, cutting off my air. Aurelio didn't step closer. Instead, he let the pistol fall from his fingers. It clattered onto the marble, a sound of complete surrender. He held his good hand up, open and empty. "Take me," he said. His voice was not the voice of the boss. It was the voice of the man on the island. "I'm the one you want. I'm the prize. She's nothing. Let her go, and you can have me." Dane laughed, a sharp, broken sound. He was breathing hard, high on the moment. He was making the great Aurelio Voss beg. I saw it in that instant. This wasn't about escape. This wasn't about me. It was about his deep, pathetic need to feel powerful, to watch someone else be afraid. He fed on fear, and I was done feeding him. I stopped struggling. I let my body go limp, but not in defeat, in control. I turned my head, just enough to look him in the eye, my own gaze flat and cold in the lantern light. "You're a coward, Dane," I said, my voice clear, conversational. "You're not even a real killer. You just poisoned the sick. You almost killed June Calder. But what about Marcus Rivas, 62 years old, needed his heart medication? Or Elena Sanchez? She was 24. She just needed antibiotics. I ran the data. I have all their names. I know every person you murdered for a few extra dollars." He flinched, his grip, which had been iron, loosened. I had taken his pleasure away. I wasn't his terrified victim. I was the bookkeeper of his sins, reading his ledger back to him. "Enough games, Dane." The new voice was like ice water, sharp, cold, and genderless. Sable Kern. They emerged from a side hallway, flanked by Lionel Crest and two armed men. They were not panicking. They were annoyed. Their operation was being interrupted. "We're leaving," Sable said, their eyes landing on me. "A bonus. Grab her. We're retreating to the roof." Dane, energized by the new command, grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the emergency stairs. "Did you hear that? Voss, she's coming with me." I saw Aurelio's face. The man was gone. The boss was back, a cold, pale fury. He was moving. But Sable's men were faster, firing 2 warning shots into the floor, forcing the crowd back, blocking his path. Aurelio didn't hesitate. He didn't run for the stairs. He ran for the wall, where a black iron maintenance ladder, part of the museum's original architecture, led up to the mezzanine, and he was climbing, one-handed, his body a blur of pained, furious grace, disappearing into the shadows above. The rooftop was a nightmare. The wind was high, a cold blast off the harbor. The large display lanterns, which had been anchored to the roof, were tearing loose, bucking and rolling across the tar, a stampede of glowing paper monsters. A black van was waiting by the service elevator, its engine running. Get in!" Lionel was shouting, his face pale and sweating. He was closest to me, pulling me toward the open van door. This was it. I stumbled, collapsing against him, a dead weight. "My shoe!" I gasped, my ankle twisting. I can't." "You stupid—" he snarled, shoving me away from him, disgusted, turning to grab me again. It was all I needed. 1 second of contact, my hand, which had palmed the slim, trackable service card from the bar, slid it deep into the side pocket of his expensive wool coat. It was done. "I'll do it. Voss, I swear I will," Dane was shouting, grabbing me again, his other hand fumbling for a gun. Aurelio was there. He stood on the edge of the roof, his chest heaving from the climb, his wounded arm a dark slash of silk against his suit. His gun was raised, steady in his good hand. He was too far. He couldn't get a clean shot. He was waiting. He wouldn't risk me. He was waiting for the lesson from the island. He was waiting for my signal, for my consent. I locked eyes with him across the windy, chaotic roof. I gave one sharp, deliberate nod. He didn't shoot. He moved. He was a blur, faster with one arm than Dane was with 2. He didn't aim for Dane's head or chest. He closed the distance in 3 long strides and slammed the butt of his pistol hard into Dane's wrist. I heard the wet, sickening crack of bone breaking. Dane screamed, a high, thin sound, his hand flying open, his gun clattering across the roof. In the same motion, Aurelio shoved me, hard, to the ground, out of the line of fire, landing between me and the van. A shot cracked through the air. Not from Dane, from Sable. They were in the van, their face a mask of cold pragmatism. "Leave him," Sable shouted at Lionel. "He's compromised." Lionel froze, his eyes darting between Dane, who was on his knees clutching his shattered arm, and the van. He made his choice. He scrambled into the van. Sable fired twice more, not aiming to hit, but to cover their escape. The tires squealed, the van shot across the roof, disappearing down the service ramp. They were gone. For a second, there was no sound but the high, screaming wind and the whimpering of Dane Riker. Aurelio ignored him. He kicked Dane's gun away, where it skittered into the darkness. Mara's team, silent and efficient, was already emerging from the stairwell, moving to secure him. Aurelio turned to me. He hauled me to my feet, his good arm pulling me into his chest, crushing me against him. I was shaking. A violent, full-body tremor, the adrenaline finally crashing. He was shaking too, from the climb, the pain in his shoulder, the sheer, violent relief. "You're safe," he breathed, his face buried in my hair. "You're safe." I pulled back, just enough to see his face. It was pale, streaked with sweat, his eyes burning with a dark, furious fire. I didn't think. I didn't ask. I grabbed the front of his suit with both hands, pulled him down, and kissed him. It was not the slow, sweet discovery on the island. This was a collision. It was desperate, hard, and brutal. It was a promise. It was, "I am here." It was a vow that we were both, against all odds, still alive. It lasted 1 second, but it said everything. We broke apart, breathing hard, the taste of salt and adrenaline on our lips. We looked at the empty service ramp where the van had disappeared. "We let them go," I said, my voice hoarse, but steady. Aurelio nodded, his good hand finding mine, his grip painfully tight, our fingers lacing together. "We let them go," he confirmed, his voice a low growl of anticipation. This was not the end. This was just the invitation. "The finale," he said, looking out over the dark city, toward the abandoned factories. "The finale is at Heliotrope Works, where it all began." The wind off the bay was a physical force, screaming through the broken skeletons of the Heliotrope Works. The old glass factory was dark, save for the blue, hissing light of welding torches in the main courtyard through Mara's high-powered binoculars. I could see them, Sable, pacing and furious, Lionel, looking small and nervous, checking his phone, and Dane, his arm in a crude, dirty sling, clutching a duffel bag, looking like a cornered animal. They were surrounded by pallets of their product and the heavy, steel stamping machines, trying to move their operation. "They're jumpy," Mara's voice crackled in my earpiece. I was perched in the old foreman's office, a high, glass-walled box overlooking the entire factory floor. My hand was on the main electrical breaker, a massive, rusted lever. Aurelio was below, hidden in the shadows of the loading dock, his team in place. "They're about to be jumpier," Aurelio replied, his voice a calm rumble in my ear. The sirens started first, a distant official wail, then the floodlights. 3 white vans emblazoned with the official-looking crest of the Port Watch Authority screeched to a halt at the main gate, men in dark blue tactical vests. Port Watch, in bold yellow letters, spilled out, fanning out, establishing a perimeter. "What is this?" I heard Sable shout, their voice tinny over the long-range mic. "That's not Voss, that's Feds the Tribunal." Lionel panicked, his voice rising to a shriek. "I didn't know I didn't the leak. It must have been a setup." "It's a setup," Sable snarled, drawing their weapon, finally realizing the trap. "They're not Feds. They're Voss." Right on cue, Aurelio stepped out of the loading bay. He wasn't running. He wasn't in tactical gear. He was still in the black suit from the gala, his ruined arm in its black silk sling. He walked alone. His footsteps were the only sound, a slow, deliberate crunch on the factory floor, which was covered in a glittering, ankle-deep sand of shattered, multicolored glass. He stopped in the center of the yard, the blue torchlight painting his face in harsh, moving shadows. Sable's few remaining men raised their weapons. Aurelio ignored them. He reached into his suit pocket with his good hand. He didn't pull his gun. He pulled the single black ceramic chip from the rainfire, the one he'd used to buy my freedom. He held it up, letting it catch the torchlight, then threw it. It skittered across the glass sand, spinning like a tossed coin, and came to rest at Sable's feet. "The accounting's over," Aurelio said, his voice carrying over the wind. That was my signal. My hand grabbed the massive, cold iron lever of the main breaker. I threw my entire weight into it. The factory plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The sirens died. The welding torches hissed and went out. The only light was the distant, red glow of the city skyline. Sable's crew panicked, shouts, curses, a few blind, wild gunshots pinged off the steel girders high above. Then, the new lights, one by one. 30 high-powered flashlights snapped on, held by Mara's team, who were now ringing the entire factory floor. It wasn't an attack, it was a fence. A cage of blinding, white beams, all pointed inward, trapping the orchid ring in a small circle of their own, illuminated terror. In the chaos, I saw a shadow break and run. Dane, and he was scrambling, crab-walking, his broken arm useless, trying to get away from the light. He slipped on the fine glass sand, falling hard, crying out in pain. I left the office, walking down the metal stairs. The knife Aurelio gave me a cold, heavy weight in my pocket. I didn't need it. He saw me, his eyes wide with animal terror, and tried to get up. I just stood over him, blocking his path. "Don't," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through his whimpering. He froze. I pulled a single, folded piece of paper from my pocket. The list, "Invoice 429, I said, my voice flat, reading into the darkness. 500 units of fake OxyContin. Street value, $25,000. Cost the life of Marcus Rivas, age 62. "Stop," Dane whimpered, holding up his good hand. "Please, Ren—" "Invoice 611, I continued, relentless, my voice as cold as the wind. 1,000 units of fake antibiotics. Street value, $6,000. Cost Elena Sanchez, age 24. She had a kidney infection, Dane. A simple infection. He wasn't a monster. He was just a pathetic, greedy man, and he was breaking." He started to sob, a deep, ugly, racking sound in the dark. He had fed on my fear for years, and now he was choking on his own reality. Mara stepped out of the shadows, silent as death, and cinched a zip tie around his one good wrist. Non-violent, decisive. It was over. "Voss?" The shout came from across the yard. It was Lionel. He'd recovered his nerve. He had his silver pistol, and he was aiming it straight at Aurelio, who was busy directing the port watch team to secure the pallets. There was no time to think. I screamed the signal. Two-tap. Aurelio didn't look. He didn't hesitate. He just moved, diving sideways, his good shoulder taking the impact as he rolled across the glittering, broken glass. The shot went wide, cracking against the steel girders high above before Lionel could fire again. Mara was on him, her foot kicking the back of his knee, buckling his leg. His gun went skittering across the glass. Aurelio rose to his feet, his gun in his hand, aimed steady at Lionel's head. The yard went silent. This was the moment. The traitor and the boss. Lionel squeezed his eyes shut. "Do it," he whispered, defeated. "Just do it." Aurelio held the aim for a long, heavy second. I held my breath. Then he lowered the gun. "No," he said, his voice rough. "You don't get a quick death. You get a long life in a small room." He nodded to Mara. "Let the Metropolitan Commerce Tribunal have him. I want them to expose every account. I want them to burn the Glass Harbor Trust to the ground, in the light." Sable hadn't run. They were standing by the mouth of the main furnace, the old, cold forge. They were watching. their face a mask of detached, almost academic curiosity. "Impressive," Sable called out, their voice echoing slightly. "You've broken my toys. Voss, you've broken my money, man." "It's over, Sable," Aurelio said, walking toward them, his men holding their lights steady, framing him. "Is it?" Sable laughed, a dry, humorless sound. They backed slowly into the massive, dark furnace room. "You still think your grandfather's rules apply. You still think this city runs on honor. You're a dinosaur, Aurelio. You just won a battle, but you'll lose the war. There will always be a new drug, a new market." Aurelio followed them, stopping at the threshold, the two of them, the old power and the new, facing each other in the darkness. "The war is over," Aurelio said, his voice flat, "because I'm changing the rules, my legacy. It's not about honor anymore. It's about survival. And I will break you with the law and the docks. Sable, not with the graveyard." He turned his back, a final, absolute dismissal. "Mara, take them." The sirens that came next were real. The port watch vans drove away, and the official, if fabricated, Metropolitan Commerce Tribunal cars arrived. Mara's team, now acting as dutiful citizens, handed over the prisoners. They handed over the tons of evidence. They handed over the files for the Glass Harbor Trust. I stood with the tribunal's stunned-looking director, who had been woken and told to show up. I handed him the final piece, a single sheet of paper, my flow chart, the map of their money, from the first fake shipment to the last dirty dollar in the trust, a single red arrow, piercing the entire network. As the first, pale, gray light of dawn began to steam off the harbor, the factory was quiet. The sirens were gone. The glass sand was just glittering dust. I was standing on an old, rusty iron catwalk, watching the sun hit the water. I didn't hear him approach. I just felt the warmth. Aurelio came to stand behind me. His good arm circled my waist, pulling me back against his solid, warm chest. He was exhausted. I could feel the deep, weary tremor in his body, the pain from his shoulder finally catching up. His chin rested on the top of my head. "From now on," he whispered, his voice rough with fatigue, "Beltide has no more fake medicine." We stood there for a long time, just breathing, as the city woke up. My clean phone in my pocket buzzed. I almost ignored it. I pulled it out. It was a text, not from a blocked number. It was from a real one. "Miss Calder, this is Alan Greaves, counsel for the Metropolitan Commerce Tribunal. As per our new agreement, I'm confirming that Dane Riker, Lionel Crest, and Sable Kern have all entered guilty pleas in exchange for cooperation to dismantle the entire National Orchid Ring network. They have accepted their sentences. Furthermore, all seized assets from the Glass Harbor Trust are being liquidated. A victims' compensation fund has been established. Your sister's name is at the top of the list." It was over. Not just captured, finished. Legally. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I saw Dane at the rainfire window. Aurelio turned me around to face him. His eyes were clear, the pain and fury replaced by a deep, quiet intensity. He reached into his pocket and placed a single, new, shiny key in my hand. "It's an apartment," he said, his voice low. "Uptown. It overlooks the water. It's safe." I looked at the key. I looked at him. "Stay or go. Ren, it's your choice. You're free. You don't owe me anything." He paused, his gaze holding mine. "But if you stay, I will build this city according to your word." He was giving me the one thing I had never had, the choice, the power. I looked past him, at the harbor, the water turning from gray to blue, the place where a cold rain had pushed me toward a stranger. I thought of the fear, the running, and the moment on the island when I had stopped. I looked back at him. I didn't say yes. I just gave him a small, quiet nod. A smile, the one I had seen at dawn on the island, slow and real, spread across his face. He held out his good hand. I placed mine in it, lacing our fingers together. Aurelio, Voss, and I walked out of the ruined glass factory, leaving the shadows and the ghosts behind. We stepped out into the bright, clean morning of a new bell tide. Our love, a thing that shouldn't have existed, forged and finally finished in the fire and the rain. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We're so curious where you are listening from. Please comment below, share your thoughts, and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.